If you live in the real world, you can't do without oil. We use its byproducts every day. But the easy oil has long since been found, and now oil companies must scour the ends of the earth to uncover new sources. Environmentally, the stakes are getting higher. Nowhere is off limits. Opposition from environmental groups is growing, but so is the world's hunger for energy. We need the oil, but how far will we go to get it? The Middle East is a tinderbox, so the West needs oil from elsewhere. Today, Canada and Alaska supply 20% of the oil consumed in the United States. But what seems politically safe is environmentally sensitive. In Alberta, Canada, ancient forest is under threat. Alberta's tar sands may contain more oil than Saudi Arabia, and most of it is heading for America's gas stations. In Alaska, the pristine landscape of a wildlife refuge could soon be opened up to oil prospectors. Environmentalists are horrified. We had come to Alaska to tell the story of oil in the wilderness. It was never going to be easy. Oil companies are paranoid, elusive and wary of bad publicity. We approached BP, one of the main operators in Alaska. This oil giant, the second largest in the world, has recently rebranded itself as the Green Oil Company, with a new name, BP, Beyond Petroleum. Its publicly stated goals are to do no damage to the environment and to build trust in all its relationships.
Turn that off.
What?
Turn that video off. We're not here to be photographed.
Is there any way I can get any farther than this?
No, sir. You need to turn around right now.
And why is that?
This is,
According to BP's own mission statement, we aim for a radical openness,
We'll
a
turn
new
around.
approach from a new company,
welcome.
transparent, questioning, flexible, restless, and inclusive. Despite this, BP rejected all our approaches, saying it chose not to have any of its people or facilities involved with this project.
Oil companies are really caught between two fires because the problem for them is that on the one hand they have to deal with the challenges of extracting the oil, all the technical challenges of getting it out of the ground, and on the other hand, massive pressures from environmentalists not to damage the environment in the process. It's tough to be an oil company. Reality is if we want oil, if we like to drive our private cars, if we like to heat our houses, the oil has to come from somewhere.
Flying over Alaska makes you feel like an explorer discovering a new world. Alaska is the largest state in the USA. Its name is taken from a native word meaning great land. We were on a journey that would take us the length and breadth of Alaska, from Anchorage and Valdez in the south to the oil fields in the north. Our journey would draw us into a fierce controversy over plans to allow drilling in ANWR, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Environmentalists argue that letting oil companies into the Arctic refuge is the thin end of the wedge. They fear that other national parks and even the oil-rich coastlines of New England and California could be next. We started out in Prudhoe Bay, where there's a place called Dead Horse. It's home to the biggest oil fields in the USA. The town services the area's oil fields and provides a transit point for thousands of shift workers. It's a dump. It has a population of just 26. Alcohol is banned, and in the depth of winter, it is dark 24 hours a day. It is here that we met Pam Miller. She's a biologist who spent years studying the impact of oil in the Arctic. Her reports have been used by the US Congress.
Any oil field depends on a support area like this with airports, places to put all the pipelines, and lots of heavy machinery. They have to have a place to put it, so they build a place like this. Huge industrial complex.
Oil companies like to say that modern technology has made the environmental footprint of their operations very small.
At the best, they're misleading the public because the oil fields continue to spread with the whole works sprawling across the tundra, and it's a far cry from something you could characterize as small. These are just a few of the 1,000 miles of pipelines in the Prudhoe Bay area. Each year there's over 400 spills of oil, hydraulic fluid, diesel, and other toxic compounds.
There are few visitors to Dead Horse, so there's no one to contradict an oil company like BP when it talks about doing no damage to the environment. It seemed to us that BP means not too much damage.
It's really impossible for oil companies to be faultless guardians of the environment, because the reality is you cannot go in, you cannot extract oil without doing some damage. My own view is that environmental organizations tend often to be purists and make demands of oil companies which the oil companies can't possibly satisfy and do their job, which is to say, get us oil at the same time.
Believe it or not, Dead Horse was once pristine wilderness. Leaving it behind, we flew over the Arctic Wildlife Refuge. We crossed the Brooks Range Mountains, and beneath us lay the coastal plains, thought to be rich in oil. In the spring and summer months, these plains teem with wildlife. We were on our way to a tiny island just north of the Wildlife Refuge. The small settlement here can only be reached by air. Polar bears frequently wander into town. Kaktovik is home to a community of native Inupiats. It's a desolate place with only one hotel in town, the Waldo Arms. The Inupiat live off the land and are one of only 2 native peoples allowed to hunt whales in the USA. We'd arrived just after a kill and fresh whale meat was still on display. If drilling in the refuge goes ahead, this community's future could be dramatically affected, for better or worse. The whole issue was controversial, and local people were wary of talking to us. It took a lot of persuasion to get the fire chief, George Tagaruk, to agree to an interview, and even then, he would only give us 20 minutes.
Doesn't matter with me. You got 19 minutes now.
We got a surprise. when he told us what he thought should happen to the Arctic refuge.
Open it, drill it. America needs the oil. We can't even run this vehicle without gas. You can make toothbrushes, toothpastes, whatever they make out of oil.
As far as he was concerned, oil development would give Kaktovik basic necessities.
A highway so we could drive out, Know how much it costs to fly from here to Fairbanks? $396, one way. You take a road, you could drive over for $100, worth of gas.
It might sound strange, but it didn't take us long to find out why the Inupiat community is pro-oil. Kaktovik gets its share of Alaska's oil wealth. Every year, it receives an income from the oil industry, which has paid for services like running water and flushing toilets, and recently provided George Tagaruk with 2 new fire engines. We visited the Native Village office, where we met former Mayor Fenton Rexford.
Hi, Chris Buchanan.
Rexford was born and raised in Kaktovik. He's lived here all his life and remembers the hard times before the oil money started to flow.
In 1951, the year I was born, and we didn't have electricity, no telephones, no running water, no trucks or no type of transportation other than dog teams, gathering wood and gathering ice for drinking water. Since oil was discovered, we've seen positive changes in our community. We now have electricity, we have clinics and police departments and a modern school. Without the oil discovery, we'd be living in the third world.
We didn't find much nightlife in Kaktovik, where a night out consists of watching polar bears feed off discarded whale bones. Kaktovik feels about as far away from Washington as you can get. Yet it's Washington that will determine the future of this place and the people who live here.
We can do a better job in conservation, but we darn sure have to do a better job of finding more supply. Of finding more supply, more supply, more supply, more supply, more supply.
When it's a choice between oil supplies and the environment, the Bush administration favors oil. While we were in Washington, the White House was trying to pass an energy bill which would permit oil drilling in ANWR, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. This could provide the US with 6 or maybe 26 months' supply of oil. Needless to say, liberals and environmentalists are seething.
They're giving away some of America's last wild, great places. Now, do we think that's a good idea? No! Should we sacrifice our wild places? No!
Oddly enough, we seem to find that protests about the wildlife refuge get angrier the further you are from Alaska.
And I came long ways from Alaska to voice for my elders and for our future generation. And we're going to continue to protect the most important place in the world where the life began.
We will stop any energy bill from passing if it includes drilling in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge.
There's clearly passion on the streets, but there's another side to the argument over ANWR. At the Center for Strategic and International Studies, we got some big picture analysis.
Oil is the heartbeat of our country, and if you do damage to that heartbeat, you do damage to the country as a whole. Today, the world consumes about 77, 78 million barrels of oil every day, and it's growing on an annual basis another million and a half barrels per day. So think what the world will be consuming by the end of this decade, let alone in 2020, which really isn't that far away. Where is the oil going to come from? Every energy decision we make has a trade-off. If we don't develop ANWR, then we have to expand our reliance on oil imports from countries whose national interests may not always be supportive of ours.
Here in Washington, lobbyists and special interest groups compete for the attention of the politicians who will decide the future of the Arctic refuge. Over at the Senate, we had an appointment with one of Alaska's senators, Republican Lisa Murkowski. Her support for oil drilling on the refuge is well known. She doesn't believe it's a threat to Alaska's environment.
The Arctic coastal plain is 1.5 million acres, but what we are looking to do is to drill on an area no greater than 2,000 acres. So the footprint is very, very small. And with the advanced technology that we have in place now in Alaska as far as how we drill, it's a very clean, it's a very safe, and it's a very environmentally responsible manner.
One of the most outspoken opponents of drilling is a Democrat senator from California. In March 2003, Barbara Boxer blocked a budget resolution that could have paved the way for oil prospectors to drill in Alaska's Arctic refuge.
If we close the SUV loophole and just had the SUVs get the same mileage as cars, we would save 16% on the amount of oil we have to import. And we see,
I think the whole big lie of the proponents of drilling is that it would do minimal damage. That's not true. There are 2,000 patches of oil all through the refuge. So you would have to have drilling throughout the 1.5 million acres. Plus, you would have all the roads and the pipelines and the activity, and it would be really the end of a magnificent place. It would destroy it. This administration is radical on this. There's no other way to put it. And they are walking away from America's environmental heritage. And they figure if they can do it here, if they can get away with it here, they can do it anywhere.
Outside, the demonstrators had moved on. We followed them back to their headquarters at the Alaska Wilderness Center.
I'm very much against drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. It belongs to every citizen in the country, not just Alaskans, and it's not meant for oil drilling. Right now, the entire north coast of Alaska, 95% of it is already available for oil drilling. This is the 5% we're saying, this is special, this needs to be protected, and no drilling should happen here.
At the center, we met a Canadian couple who had just spent 5 months in the refuge following the migration of the caribou. They'd brought with them a video of their trip, which they'd been using to support the Wilderness League's campaign.
It's 5 o'clock in the morning, and this is our newborn calf. You can see the umbilical cord still hanging off the mother. It's just trying to get its first shaky, wobbly steps. You know, the whole time we were wondering how possibly can oil companies live up to their promises of not disturbing these animals.
There was a hush to the whole place. You know, it had the sacredness of where life begins for all these animals, where that all-important bond between the cows and the calves starts. It's like a nursery, you know, it's like a maternity ward. And it's so upsetting, you know, that the people in power, that the people who are making these decisions, they're worried about cheap oil for Americans, and it's incredibly frustrating.
On the southern edge of the wildlife refuge, inside the Arctic Circle, there's a small native community known as Arctic Village. It's one of the most isolated places in the United States. Its inhabitants, the Gwich'in people, have lived in this area for thousands of years. When oil was discovered in Alaska, the Gwich'in were offered a share of the oil wealth. Wishing to retain their traditional way of life, they turned it down. So, though they have access to the internet, they still have no running water or street lighting. Community leader Edward Sam showed us around.
Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is from in the middle of the river over. It goes all the way around our tribal land. It goes all the way down by another 100 miles. I have never left my community in over 2 years. That's how much I love this place. So I got involved in the vacation. I went down to Anchorage for 2 days. I'm tired of hearing cars. You know, it's the last place on this earth that's pretty much clean. And they're going to go in there and try to drill for oil. Our tribes oppose it. You know, it's survival for us.
There are no hotels in Arctic Village, so we stayed in people's homes. The next morning, the village took its time waking up. Local hunter Charlie Sweeney had heard we were in town.
There's one thing that we all have in common here, and that is we live off the land. 80% of our diet is from off the land.
When the caribou start coming through, everybody's expression changes, and they know they're going to eat. Everybody's happy. And then you look at the kids. You see the kids are happy.
The caribou, I mean, for years and years and years and years, they've been going to a place up there. They have their calves every single year, year after year. Now, why is that? Why do they keep going to that place? Because there's nothing wrong with that place. They're at peace of mind there. That's why they keep going there. That's their home that time of year. Now, they want to drill for oil there. Nobody knows what kind of impact it's going to have on them. Senator Murkowski said that it may have a minimal impact. Now, what if that minimal impact is that percentage of the caribou that comes through here? What are we going to do? We can't rely on the store for buying food every day there. There's no jobs, there's no money here. That we're not like in Fairbanks or Anchorage where you could go down to job service and apply for a job and get a job. It's not like that here.
For the moment, opposition has blocked oil companies from developing Alaska's Arctic refuge. But 1,500 miles away in Canada, a very different source of oil is proving to be yet another source of controversy. Lying beneath the boreal forest, the Albertan tar sands could contain a gigantic 300 billion barrels of oil. Like Alaska's Arctic refuge, this area is ecologically sensitive, but production on a massive scale is already in full swing. We paid a visit to Suncor, one of the largest oil operations in Alberta. At the plant, we met Executive Vice President Steve Williams, who showed us how the process works.
What you can see happening here is literally what we call a shovel and truck operation, where these big trucks, these 350-ton trucks, are being used to move that ore to the front end of the extraction process.
This is no conventional oil field. There is no drilling. Instead, oil is extracted from the sand. It's an incredibly expensive process, but increasingly profitable as oil prices climb and global demand increases. Awestruck, we watched as trucks 30 feet high collected sand containing the oil deposits and carried it to a processor where the elements are separated out. The trucks run day and night, 365 days a year. Every day they move 1 million tons of earth, which will yield 220,000 barrels of oil. The company makes no bones about the fact that its extraction process isn't exactly kind to the environment.
It does produce greenhouse gases. So one of our focuses is making sure that we put the latest technology in and we responsibly manage the upgrading operation. But at the end of the day, this operation is not benign.
$50 billion worth of new tar sands development is already on the drawing board. But not all Canadians are in favour of this expansion. In March 2004, we met up with Maud Barlow, a campaigner who believes that the current wave of oil development is against Canada's best interests, not just environmentally, but politically too. A Canadian nationalist, Barlow was in Toronto to rally public opinion.
So we're very excited to be here today, and this is the first wave of what we're hoping is going to be a very powerful campaign across the country that's going to involve many, many groups, and you should know that tomorrow... Canada's oil policy is now set in Houston and Washington. The Bush administration clearly believes that Canada is America's gas tank, and that they don't have to worry about having run out in all of their states except Alaska, because they've got the great sponge to the north of them with all the oil and gas and water and hydroelectricity and everything else.
In order to spread her message, Barlow was speaking at a series of public forums across the country. We followed her to an old Toronto church where she addressed over 400 people.
And that's what's happened. The United States has an energy security plan. They want to get weaned off of the Middle East for their energy. They want a friendly country to supply them with cheap, stable supplies of energy. And they have chosen Canada, and they are very, very clear that this is where the future for the U.S. lies. And I don't think 1 in 1,000 Canadians has the faintest idea it's happening. We have a federal election coming.
Barlow believes that precious Canadian oil reserves are being wasted.
We are furious that the United States is absolutely, under the Bush administration, is absolutely uninterested in conservation. They are saying full speed ahead, we're going to develop the oil supplies wherever we choose to, damn the torpedoes, it doesn't matter what the environmental implication is, or for the peoples who live in the area, or for the indigenous peoples of those communities. We're going to go where we want to go, and that's it. We have been given a gift to live in a country that's rich in these resources, and it is our responsibility while we are here to be stewards, to be keepers of these resources, so they are here for other generations, and they are here for people who need them. And if we don't take care of this energy on our watch, it's going to be gone. Thank you.
Many people working in the Canadian oil industry feel that campaigners like Barlow are too simplistic. Dave Yeager used to edit an oil industry magazine called Roughneck. He now runs an oil services company in Calgary. Yeager drove us out of the city to Turner Valley, the site of Canada's first oil boom in the 1930s. He says as long as there's been an oil industry here, there's been opposition.
There's always been a group of Canadians that are, for reasons of national sovereignty, are opposed to oil development. That, again, there's some sort of sinister plot where we're really a puppet of the United States, that the United States is some giant oil-consuming global destruction machine, and we're fitting into some master plan somewhere. These are the same people that will fly to the next environmental protection conference somewhere around the world and depend on the petroleum industry to keep enough fuel in the jet so it gets off the ground and doesn't crash. So to those of us in the oil business, again, everything we do is 100% consumer driven. People want fuel, we make a living selling it. And so it's very difficult for those of us who work in the oil business to understand where a lot of these people are coming from.
We asked him about the environmental impact of the Albertan tar sands.
The industry, believe me, is looking for economically viable and environmentally benign methods of doing this. I mean, the attraction of the tar sands is a huge resource. There's no geological risk. It's politically safe. I mean, that's why you're there. Boy, oh boy, believe me, if the industry could find some way using technology or improved economics to develop those resources in a way that's more environmentally benign so they don't have to fight with everybody, believe me, they'd jump all over it. No question.
To see what oil companies are doing to reduce their impact on the environment, we drove north to Fort Mackay, home to a small indigenous community of Cree and Chippewan descent. The community used to rely on the land for survival, but today it makes a living providing essential oil industry services, from trucking to catering. With up to 400 million barrels of oil beneath their land, they are now proposing to set up a tar sands operation of their own. Of course, this development will damage the land, but Jim Boucher, chief of the Fort Mackay First Nation, believes that the land can be reclaimed and ultimately restored to its former condition.
This is reclaimed land here, and we planted all those trees, and you can see that we've been successful in growing back trees and reclaiming the area quite substantially.
The industry has tried to offset the impact of oil development with several reclamation projects, which include replanting trees and creating a bison sanctuary.
Yeah, there they are. They're just standing around eating or sleeping. We're quite proud of our achievement here and how Fort Mackay was involved in this whole project. And this is a very clear demonstration in terms of the ability for reclamation projects to work. And that's why I wanted to bring it here.
If it was up to most Alaskans, they'd drill in the Arctic Refuge. Driving into Anchorage, the state's largest city, we found a skyline dominated by oil company headquarters: Unocal, ConocoPhillips, and BP. The oil business provides over 2/3 of Alaskan state revenues, and oil field jobs are some of the highest paid in the state. Thanks to oil, Alaskans pay no state income tax, and every man, woman, and child receives an annual oil dividend, usually around $1,000, their own personal share of the oil wealth.
You can use your dividend right now today, and that'll make your monthly payments really, really low. Look, a new Ford Focus, $99 a month. We got 1,338 of them. Come on in and take your pick. And again, you can use your dividend right now today at Worthington Ford. We're open every night till midnight, and we'll leave the coffee pot on for you.
75% of Alaskans think drilling on the Arctic Refuge should be allowed. In Alaska, oil drilling is overseen by regulators like the Alaska Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. We met one of its commissioners, Randy Riedrich, who felt the oil company's environmental record was good.
When I came to Alaska in the early 70s, it was by virtue of the cold, the darkness, etc., a very treacherous place to work. Today, it is as safe or safer than drilling operations in many other parts of the world. Oil spills have been reduced, and the more important thing is when a small oil spill does occur, it is generally within a day or two 100% removed from the environment. Well, this map, for example,
Commissioner Riedrich explained that thanks to a new technology known as directional drilling, a single drill site can now do the work that was once done by 3, thus reducing the overall footprint of the oil field operations.
Our technological changes have been immense, We've gone from using over 10% of the surface to now using well under 0.5% of the surface.
To see if new technology is reducing oil's footprint, we had flown up to Dead Horse in Prudhoe Bay, home to the largest oil fields in the US. In this unique environment, oil companies fiercely guard their green reputations, and the technology they use is supposed to be state-of-the-art. One of the biggest operators in the area is BP. We had hoped BP would be willing to show us how new techniques enable it to reduce its impact on the environment. But as we have already seen, BP wanted nothing to do with us.
Turn that off.
What?
Turn that
Can-
video off. We're not here to be photographed.
Is there any way I can get any farther than this?
No, sir. You need to turn around right now.
And why is that?
This is,
Perhaps it's not hard to see why BP is so publicity shy. In 2000, BP was fined $22 million and placed on federal probation after pleading guilty to a criminal pollution violation. One of its contractors had been caught dumping toxic waste into the Arctic seabed. Such incidents are often brought to light, not by the regulators 600 miles away in Anchorage, but by whistleblowers like Mark Kovac.
I'm part of BP's maintenance staff in the field, and I worked up here for over 25 years. Anything that falls apart, like valves or chokes or the hydraulic systems that keep the wells flowing, I work on those.
Kovac didn't feel comfortable being filmed in public, so we followed him to a remote location where we could talk undisturbed.
I am taking a risk by coming here tonight. I could lose my job, and I could also get other workers in trouble. I'm doing this because BP doesn't like to make changes. We've had to force them to make changes. And forcing them to make changes means voicing our issues to newspapers and to the media.
As a union vice president, Kovac has received many reports from concerned workers who complain that the company ignores their warnings.
We have cases of intimidation of British Petroleum workers as well as the contract staff. I have a statement from another BP employee. He states, "My career is ruined with BP for bringing forth safety and environmental issues." And this gentleman does not work for BP anymore.
In a written statement, BP claims they encourage employees to raise safety concerns and work to address them within the company. They respect the right of employees to take their concerns outside the company, and harassment or intimidation of concerned employees is not tolerated. Kovac believes that the root cause of the problem is economics.
BP's cutting back on maintenance mainly for short-term profit. They've cut the budget on maintenance, and our systems have degraded. The pipelines are worn out. Those pipelines need to be replaced. BP has cut back on our emergency response services while they're taking care of the short-term budget. We've had people who've been injured. We've had people who've been killed. We've had explosions and fires and damage to the environment. The management has shut us out. They won't talk to us. We don't have any other choice but to fight them with all the strength that we have and with all the tools that we have.
The BP statement goes on to say that worker safety and the environment are primary concerns in BP's business. That with a dramatic decline in injury rates, the North Slope oil fields are among the safest work locations in the United States. that its emergency response capability is extensive, that the company has increased its maintenance spending, investing more than $160 million every year, and that through the application of new technology, BP has achieved a 10-fold decrease in internal corrosion rates. BP is confident of the condition and operational integrity of their facilities and pipelines. On the telephone, a BP spokesman said that the company wants to squeeze what we want out of existing assets in Alaska, meaning they want to get as much value as possible from existing investment and existing infrastructure.
One of the greatest challenges that oil companies have is that they have to invest billions of dollars to get oil out of the ground. And the balancing act is to figure out how long the oil is going to last and how they can draw down the value of the equipment so that the end of the value of the equipment, its useful life, comes to an end at the same time as there's no oil left. As the oil equipment comes to the end of its useful life, the question is, will there be more oil spills, for example? And that's something that regulators and oil companies are mindful of, and they have to watch out for.
Critics fear that Alaska's government regulators are too close to the oil industry. Randy Riedrich, the state regulator we met in Anchorage, was himself once an oil man. In fact, he ran the drilling company whose dumping of toxic waste resulted in BP's current probation and record-breaking fine.
I think most people would say that we're very close to the industry, but I would say we're definitely not inside the industry. I feel very, very good about what we do. I think we do it very, very consistently, very reliably, and the two major operators in the Arctic do an outstanding job of policing their impact on the environment.
The challenges for Alaska's oil industry don't end in Prudhoe Bay. The oil has to be delivered to the global market. To get there, it's pumped down the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. We followed the pipeline for 800 miles as it snaked across Alaska, south to the port of Valdez. It is capable of carrying up to 2 million barrels of oil a day, and if the Arctic refuge is opened up to drilling, this 30-year-old pipeline will transport the new oil. It is the most highly regulated pipeline on Earth, but we had heard reports that its safety was being compromised, again due to economic cutbacks. So we decided to find out if it was up to the job. We stopped halfway down the pipeline in Fairbanks to meet Richard Feinberg. He's an independent environmental consultant who once served as senior advisor to the Alaskan governor on oil and gas policy. Feinberg lives in a log cabin in the woods and has made his life's work the protection of the environment.
Welcome to my cabin. Come on in. Come right this way. And watch yourself there. That step is kind of icy. So come on in.
Feinberg has spent countless hours striving to ensure that Alyeska, the company responsible for the pipeline, follows its own maintenance procedures.
I thought I would show you the oil spill contingency plan for the pipeline. This is the first of 6 volumes. It's the general provisions. It's an industrial operation. It goes by the plan.
Feinberg wanted to show us what happens when even the smallest breach in procedure occurs. In October 2001, a bullet just half an inch in diameter pierced the pipeline. The oil spill contingency plan specifies that a special bullet hole clamp should be used in this instance. But in 36 hours, 285,000 gallons of oil spewed out before Alyeska were able to stop the leak.
I don't see a bullet hole clamp. and this is 24 hours after the spill began. They failed completely to be able to stop the leak. It's like a doctor at the scene of the accident not being able to stop the bleeding. Might be a very good doctor to repair your broken leg, but if he didn't put the tourniquet on to stop the bleeding, you'd be dead.
We followed Feinberg on one of his one-man inspection tours of the pipeline. He's concerned about cutbacks at Alyeska, whose major owners are BP, ConocoPhillips, and ExxonMobil. He's not alone. In November 2003, a maintenance supervisor at Alyeska with 28 years' experience publicly accused the company of dangerously underinvesting in upkeep, training, and emergency response. Since then, Alyeska says that it has addressed most of the matters raised, but Feinberg remains concerned. After an hour, we got our first close-up glimpse of the pipeline, dramatically suspended across a wide river. We carried on towards a major earthquake region where Feinberg believes the pipeline is particularly vulnerable. We arrived at the Denali Fault. An earthquake here recently shook the pipeline and damaged some of its supports. Feinberg wanted to check a number of different things. The positioning of the pipeline on its sleepers, the condition of the vertical supports, and the effectiveness of the insulation.
That's water. This is wet insulation. The design basis is very specific about the reason for the insulation, to keep the oil warm if they have to shut down. If it's wet, it's not doing it. This has been an ongoing problem. I'm very surprised to find it here because wet insulation could lead to an oil spill.
Feinberg believes that a spill here could be catastrophic.
If the pipe broke here, you would have a 48-inch hose pouring out oil until they stopped the leak. You would foul the land with oil, and all of the habitat down here would die and have to be cleared.
In the last 10 years, Feinberg has raised dozens of maintenance issues with Alyeska and the regulatory authorities. We asked him what kind of response he has received.
I believe that many of the engineers and the managers are outrageously arrogant. Since pipeline construction, I have watched the public relations game that the oil industry has played, claiming we can do it right when they're not doing it right. I believe people ought to do what they say they're going to do, and if they don't do it, own up to it.
Declining to be interviewed, Alyeska, like BP, issued a statement that they place a premium on the integrity of their system and take their environmental stewardship very seriously. Following the bullet hole spill, Alyeska stated that they used a clamp to stop the oil leak. They had people in the site within 2 hours. Within 12 hours, they had identified and contained the leading edge of the oil spill. Afterwards, they worked with regulatory agencies on how to improve their response, and general opinion in Alaska is they did a solid job.
It's a long, lonesome go traveling down that Frisco road, every mile feeling I was all alone.
Alyeska also said all these issues were raised by a small group of critics who routinely criticize all aspects of our business.
But I don't know where I left it, it's always on my mind. I ask the same old questions all the time. Is your hometown still the same? Does anybody know my name? The years slip by, Part numbers on an endless highway sign. I'd do it there.
We continued along the route of the pipeline south to its terminal at Valdez. In this fragile ecosystem, oil companies are under enormous pressure to show they can be trusted with the environment. But here, in 1989, trust in the oil industry was permanently damaged. At 4 minutes past midnight on the 24th of March, 1989, the supertanker Exxon Valdez hit a reef, tearing a hole in its hull and spilling at least 11 million gallons of oil into the waters of Prince William Sound.
I don't think there's any way of describing what it was like when I saw the beach. Even to this day, when you start talking about it, it puts a knot in your stomach. There's no amount of dollars that can replace what they've done to Prince William Sound.
Today, tractor tugs escort the oil tankers through the Valdez Narrows, and a sophisticated radar system monitors their every move. But despite these improvements, we discovered that the legacy of the Exxon Valdez endures. To see its long-term impact, you need to travel another 80 miles south to Cordova. Before the spill, this town was the center of a thriving multi-million-dollar fishing industry. Not anymore. The town's largest cannery has closed, and there's widespread unemployment.
It's still not over. I mean, if you ask, most people outside believe that everything is fine in Prince William Sound and we're recovered, and that is not the truth at all. It's so far from the truth. Scientists thought that once the oil hit the beaches, after a year or so, it would turn into asphalt and it would no longer get into the food web. It wouldn't be harmful anymore to fish and wildlife. We found that understanding was naive, it was unsophisticated, and that has been replaced with a whole new body of information now.
Ricky Ott is a former fisherwoman with a PhD in marine toxicology. Since the spill, she has followed all the new research that's been conducted in the Sound.
There were fishery biologists, there were marine mammal experts, there were just hundreds and hundreds of studies being done in Prince William Sound. And what you see is consistent harm to species like herring, killer whales, harlequin ducks, sea otters. They're not able to reproduce normally. The adult females are still dying at higher numbers. It actually has taught us that oil is much, much more toxic than we had ever imagined going into this. It's 1,000 times more toxic, not only in fish and wildlife, but also in people.
These are disturbing conclusions. We were left wondering why oil companies aren't more open about the trade-off between our need for oil and a clean environment.
We're a great mobile population, and we love our gasoline and we love our big cars. We might like to say goodbye to the internal combustion engine, but it's going to be a long goodbye.
The good Lord gave us resources so that man can use them, but he also gave man brains, and we're not using our brains.
When the world really wants to pony up and pay the price that it costs to develop fuel in an environmentally benign fashion, we in the petroleum industry are there for you. We'll do it. Delighted to do it.
There are no solutions to the energy problem. There's going to be massive trade-offs between desiring more oil supplies and, on the other hand, protecting the environment, protecting the interests of native peoples, and these aren't going to be easy choices.
This much is certain. The debate over Alaska's Arctic refuge is a sign of our times, because the world's growing demand for oil will put ever more pressure on the world's remaining wilderness.
How a young French waiter was convicted of stealing hundreds of valuable artworks to create a beautiful gallery in his bedroom. Stay with BBC4 for Art in the Canal next.